All right, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners Annual Seminar. We are so excited to see everyone this morning. I'd like to introduce our seminar team, Lydia Hartman from the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, who is zooming behind the scenes to help you with technical concerns today. Liz Barlick with the Cleveland Division of Water, who will be moderating the chat box. Myself, Erin Huber from Drink Local Drink Tap, who will guide this session today, and Crystal MC Davis, who will be moderating today's session with Dr. Manny Teodoro. Please again, say hello and tell us who you are and why you're here in the chat. This year, we're focused on the affordability side of water equity, and we're honored to be hearing from water equity expert, Dr. Manny Teodoro, in just a few minutes. Thank you to the Cleveland Division of Water for making Dr. Teodoro's presentation possible today. And for those newer to learning about water equity, the U.S. Water Alliance defined it well. Equity refers to just and fair inclusion, a condition where everyone has an opportunity to participate and prosper. Water equity occurs when all communities have access to safe, clean, affordable drinking water and wastewater services. They are resilient in the face of floods, drought, and other climate risks, have a role in the decision-making processes related to water management in their communities, and share in the economic, social, and environmental benefits of water systems. In 2017, the partners formed with guidance from the U.S. Water Alliance in the first national attempt to explore water equity issues in several U.S. cities and to create roadmaps to launch local action. What has been special about this process is the active and genuine presence of utilities, nonprofits, and others working hand in hand to improve our communities. When the COVID-19 pandemic first hit the world, it added both new challenges and opportunities for water equity to gain a spotlight with a larger audience. The roadmap led the task force to determine its next job and identity. We became the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners in 2019. We consist of a board and 4 subcommittees: climate resilience, workforce, water champions, and affordability combined with public engagement. Each committee now has annual goals and regular meetings to make progress on the roadmap. The Climate Resilience Committee is focused on finding ways to address the water challenges of changing climate and incorporating water equity into climate action plans. Specifically, this looks like identifying areas and communities that are most vulnerable to climate change impacts, leveraging climate and sustainability partnerships, amplifying equity in emergency preparedness efforts, and aligning the Greater Cleveland Water Equity Partners efforts with existing climate objectives. The Workforce Development Committee is focused on leveraging water investments for local employment and career pathways, business development and contracting opportunities, educational programs, and neighborhood improvements. They're doing this by evaluating existing workforce development programs and contracting processes and building interest and awareness in opportunity education initiatives. The Water Champions Committee oversees our Water Champions program. Champions serve as liaisons, connecting neighborhoods with resources to understand and navigate water-related challenges. Water Champions are a resource that community members can turn to with questions, such as who to call regarding utility bills, water quality concerns, and cost savings programs. This program has been supported by the Community West Foundation, Cleveland Water, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, and CHN Housing Partners, and the Cleveland Foundation. Please learn more by visiting Our Work, the Our Work section of the Water Equity website, clewaterequity.com. And the Affordability and Public Engagement Subcommittee. This is where your host committee today sits. The Affordability and Public Engagement Subcommittee is focused on ensuring vulnerable and underserved populations are both aware of and have a voice in water management. They're doing this by building awareness and understanding about water operations and policies, including assistance programs and advocacy for funding or programming, and evaluating existing assistance programs for opportunities for change or expansion. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Crystal MC Davis, who serves on this subcommittee and the larger partners board. She is the Vice President for Policy and Engagement at the Alliance for the Great Lakes, and will be introducing our speaker and facilitating questions today.
Thank you, Erin. Good morning, colleagues, fellow water warriors. It is a pleasure to be joined with you this morning. Thanks for tuning in on a Friday morning. I have the distinct honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Manny Teodoro. Manny is an associate professor at La Follette School of Public Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He researches and teaches on environmental policy and public management. He's also engaged in applied research on utility management, policy, and finance. Beyond academic studies, Manny has worked directly with utility leaders and policymakers on affordability, equity, and regulatory implementation for nearly 25 years. With degrees from Cornell University and the University of Michigan, he's no stranger to the Great Lakes region. Before joining the University of Wisconsin last year, he served on the faculties of Texas A&M University and Colgate University. Point of personal privilege, I have had the distinct pleasure to work with Manny on a number of different projects, and definitely consider it an honor, and he is a mentor of mine. So thank you so much, Manny, for making the time to be with us here today. Take it away.
Crystal, thank you. That is just a delightful introduction. Thank you so much. I think I just attempted to share the screen. Are we up and running? Get some thumbs up. Great. Well, thank you. And it is my honor to be with you this morning. I'm always happy to talk with folks who are interested in making water equitable and affordable. In many ways, it's my life's work. My talk today is really a broad overview. What I was asked to provide was something like Water Affordability 101. I'm going to probably do something more like 150. We're going to get a little bit complicated, but we're going to try to keep things fairly general as well. Before I launch into my longer remarks, I want to start with a couple of numbers to sort of ground us in something a little concrete. Today, basic water and sewer service for a family of 4 in the city of Cleveland costs about $131 a month. And you see how it breaks down there. It's about $36 for water and about $95 for sewer. Now, I'm going to want to start with these figures to have them in the back of your mind as I give the rest of my remarks. And I wanted to start with those numbers for a couple of reasons. One is it's useful to have some concrete figures, just kind of give us a sense of what we're talking about when you think about the financial burdens on people. And the other thing is I want to emphasize that I'm going to use the word water a lot today. And when I say that, I really mean the full suite of water services here. So both water and sewer. I may not always remember to say sewer, but please know that I'm talking, unless I say explicitly, I'm also really talking about sewer as well. We have to remember in all of our conversations about water affordability that in most places in the United States, it's just like Cleveland. The sewer services cost significantly more than the water services. So when we think about affordability, when you hear people talk about water affordability, you always got to make sure, are you also including sewer in that story? Because sewers, if you're using one, you're probably using the other one as well. And often the prices are significantly higher on the sewer side. All right, so that's with that in mind, here's where I'm going to go today. I'm going to start with talking about definitions. What exactly is affordability? And then we're going to talk about how to measure affordability, because of course you can't manage what you don't measure. And then I'm going to show you some figures on water and sewer affordability in Ohio generally, and then Cleveland specifically. I'm going to finish up my remarks talking generally about the ways that we can address affordability and what we know about them. Preview is we don't know a lot, but we're learning, and I'll let you know what we do know. My plan is to talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then open things up for any discussion that folks have. I'm happy to go into greater depth on any of this stuff. As I said, I'm trying to keep things fairly general. I was a little surprised as people were logging in here to see how many folks we have from outside greater Cleveland. And I want to say, wonderful, great, welcome. Almost everything I say today applies outside of Cleveland, right? These are general things. That almost everything that we see in Cleveland, you'll see elsewhere in the United States. My talk's going to have an Ohio accent and a Northeast Ohio accent specifically, but everything here should be pretty generalizable to the United States, except the numbers, which are going to be Cleveland and Ohio specific. So let's start with the basics. What's affordability? Well, I want to start with the idea that affordability is really only partly about the price of water and sewer services. That $135 earlier, that's really only a small part of the story with affordability. Affordability is really about trade-offs. When we think about something as affordable or unaffordable, our minds immediately go to the price, but things that cost, and it's true, things that cost more, things that have a higher price are less affordable almost by definition. That is true. But the affordability of anything, whether we're talking about water or food or housing, clothes, electricity, anything, it's a function of the thing's price plus the resources available to pay for that thing, right? So we're talking about not just the price of the thing, but the resources available to pay for the thing. Think about something like a boat. So sporting boats are very popular in the Great Lakes region here. And I just moved to Wisconsin last year. I live less than a quarter mile from Lake Monona. A lot of my neighbors have boats. Some of them are little, some of them are big, and it does look like a lot of fun. And the boat that I've got on the screen here turns out costs about $40,000. And so when I ask myself this, well, that looks like a lot of fun. Is that affordable? Can I buy a boat? Works out to about $700 a month in payments if I finance it. After I pay for accessories and fuel and storage and maintenance, I'm probably looking at something between $1,000 and $1,200 a month to buy this boat. Now, I make more than $1,200 a month. So in that sense, this boat is affordable. I can't afford this boat. But of course, I have other things I've got to pay for. I need housing, I need food, I need energy to heat my home, I need health insurance, I need medicine. I got to pay my kids' college tuition, which is probably what I'm getting instead of a boat. And you know, after I pay all that stuff, it turns out I don't have $1,000 a month left to spend on a boat unless I get rid of something else. So that's a silly example, but the point I'm trying to make here is that affordability is not about the price, it's about the trade-offs that the price of the thing would force me to make. Am I going to not eat because I have the boat? Am I not going to send my children to college because I have the boat? These are the choices that I would have to make if I bought the boat. So if we turn away from a boat to something like a water bill, well, if the price of my water is so high that I can't afford to buy the boat, well, that's probably not a problem. From a public policy perspective, Manny's ability to buy a sport boat is probably not a big deal. But if my bill is so expensive that I have to sacrifice food or medicine or housing, now we've got a problem because it's endangering my health. And by extension, if you didn't get this before, the pandemic should tell you that one person's health affects everybody's health, right? So that we all have an interest in all of us having access to affordable water and sewer services. So you put it all together and we get to a definition of affordability. It's really about trade-offs. It's the trade-offs that households have to make when they pay for water and sewer services. What can people not do? What can people not buy because they have to pay a water bill? Again, it's not a big deal if our family here can't pay for a boat, but it's a big deal if they can't pay for medicine or housing or heating their homes in the winter time. So that's what affordability is. It's about the trade-offs, the sacrifices that people have to make in order to pay their water and sewer bills. Now that we know what affordability is, how do we measure affordability? Measurement's important, right? Measurement helps us make good decisions. It helps us understand how big a problem we've got. It helps us design strategies to address that problem. It helps us know when we're making progress, if we're doing better or worse. Now, there are lots of ways to measure affordability. I want to be clear about that. What I'm about to give you is not the only way to measure affordability, but I'm going to give you two metrics that I think are especially useful. The analytical stuff I'm going to show you is all covered in really deep detail with academic rigor and all of that. If you're interested, you can check out my website. There's a bunch of publications and blog posts about this stuff. I'm going to skip all the detail and try to keep things very, very general, so to give you the gist of it. I'm going to use two measures of affordability that really try to capture those trade-offs. And those are the affordability ratio and water and sewer prices in terms of hours at minimum wage. Let's start with the affordability ratio. The affordability ratio is the price of basic water and sewer service as a percentage of disposable income or available income, which might be a more accurate way to say it. Again, we probably don't care about the affordability of water if it's not essential water, right? So it's not the total price or average price of water. What we care about is the price of basic water, because we don't care about people being able to water their big lawn or wash their car or fill their swimming pool. What we care about is do you have water for drinking? Do you have water for cooking, for cleaning, for sanitation? It's the basic water service that matters. So mathematically, what we're going to do is look at something like the price of basic per capita water service. We're going to multiply by some assumed household size. And then we're going to divide that by household income less the non-water essential expenditures. So those things that you have to have alongside water. Hard to argue that anything's more important than water, anything that you buy, but there are other things that are also important. So we're going to look at things in my analysis today. We're going to look at taxes, housing, healthcare, food, and home energy. I want to be very clear here. There's nothing magic about those categories of non-water expenditures. When I've worked with utilities in other parts of the country, some folks like to add transportation costs. They like to add childcare costs to those non-essential, the non-water essential expenditures, and that's fine. It's ultimately a policy judgment what goes in that bin. I've also had folks say, you know what, home energy doesn't belong there. Home energy isn't as important as water, therefore it shouldn't be there. So again, that's a judgment call. The numbers I'm going to show you today assume taxes, housing, healthcare, food, and home energy. Now, it's important to understand that well, back up for a second. It's also important to recognize that when we talk about affordability, our real concern is not average customers or median customers. In all but the tiniest, isolated, most desperately poor communities, the median household does not have an affordability problem for water and sewer. What we're really talking about is low-income populations. Low-income folks have an affordability problem. So we are going to be looking at the 20th income percentile. Sometimes people call this the lowest quintile. Now, the 20th income percentile is the traditional boundary of the middle class in welfare economics. We tend to think of the 80th to the 20th to the 80th percentile is the middle class. And you can think of these folks operationally as sort of the working poor. These are people who will struggle to make ends meet, but maybe make too much money to qualify for a whole lot of assistance programs. If you can nail down this metric, it's a really good way to assess low-income affordability. Now, the only trouble is it's a little computationally intensive. You need a lot of data to calculate these numbers, and it's also a little bit abstract. So I used another metric to put things in a little bit more tangible terms, and that is to calculate basic water and sewer service prices in terms of hours at minimum wage labor. Now, that is not as good a metric because it's not sensitive to the other essential costs, but it's super easy to calculate, and it is wonderfully intuitive. Hours at minimum wage represents in very meaningful terms the cost of basic water and sewer service in terms of time for a low-income household, many of whom labor at or near minimum wage. If you have ever had to work at minimum wage, goodness knows I have had to work at minimum wage, this takes on a real potent meaning. When you start looking at 8, 10 to 20 some hours of labor to pay for something, that's meaningful. Okay, now that's all measurement. With that in mind, allow me to lay some data on you. Let's start with some numbers in Ohio. Oops, there's the formula. In 2019, I worked with the Alliance for the Great Lakes and the Ohio Environmental Council on a study of water affordability across Ohio. We looked at a representative sample of 300 communities across the state, and we included all of the larger cities and a random sample of the small systems, because there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of utilities across Ohio. I want to say it's around 1,000. So we calculated prices at 6,000 gallons a month. That is roughly basic indoor water needs for a family of 4. You might think, well, that's a little bit higher than the average residential bill. Well, that's true because the average household size is not 4. But 4 people using basic indoor needs for a month will use roughly 6,000 gallons. So that's what we calculated for our sample of utilities. Here's what we found. This is the overall distribution of AR20. Now, these are data from 2019. So these data are 2 years old now, but it's fairly recent. The population weighted average, you see, is 10.6. That is fairly close to the national average. It's a little bit higher, but it's about what we'd see nationally. That overall distribution is also what we'd see nationally. It's a pretty wide range. Most are below 10% of disposable income, but you see some really high numbers. Those really high numbers out there above 25 or 30, that really has less to do with the price of the service and more to do with the underlying economy. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Here's hours at minimum wage, similar shape to the distribution as you'd expect. The state average was right around 10 in 2019. Again, fairly similar distribution to what we see nationally. Ohio fitting the bill of flyover America and presidential elections. As Ohio goes, so goes the nation, right? This seems to be pretty close to what we see across the country. So how are things looking like? What do things look like in Cleveland? Well, to be honest with you, not very pretty. In 2019, the basic service for a family of 4 cost $116. I already mentioned it's up significantly from that in the 2 years since. So those numbers I showed you earlier were current numbers. So let's look at what that means in AR20 and hours minimum wage, 37.1 and 13.6. Those data, again, 2 years old now. Today, those numbers would probably look a little bit worse. AR20 would be worse because the economy is struggling and the prices have gone up. Hours of minimum wage that would go up a little bit because the prices went up, but minimum wage also increased in Ohio. Ohio has an inflation index minimum wage, but utility prices have been going up faster than inflation. So minimum wage is not keeping up with these price increases. These are not very pretty numbers, no matter how you look at them. Now, utility prices in Cleveland are a little bit on the high side, but I want to emphasize that very high AR20 number is really more a function of the underlying economy in the city of Cleveland. In Cleveland, the 20th income percentile is only about $10,000 a year. That's really low. The metro area is about a little bit over 20,000. So even when your income is under $20,000 a year, even a small bill increase can be tough to handle. It's really about the underlying economy as much as it is about the utility prices. So in case you're curious, I went ahead and pulled the numbers for some other Cleveland area water utilities that happen to be in our data set. I don't know if any of these are familiar to any of you. I have not spent a great deal of time in Greater Cleveland, so I don't know where most of these places are, but I thought it would be useful to see. And there's quite a range. There's a couple of interesting things that pop out here. They are sorted from most to least expensive. So Hudson there has the most expensive water and sewer services, 15.2 hours at minimum wage. But notice that AR20 is pretty low. What that tells you is the prices are high, but maybe the underlying economy is pretty strong. Maybe you've got a fairly affluent community, so even the 20th percentile income might be pretty high, even if the overall prices are high. So you can see these numbers don't always track real closely to each other, and that's actually a merit. Hours of minimum wage and AR20 are complementary metrics. They don't measure exactly the same thing, and it's useful because there are low-income households in affluent communities. That's important to remember. You can be in a community where the median income is very high, but there are still working poor families in those communities. And so that hours of minimum wage number is a nice sort of analytical backstop, right? To understand, put some context to what those those percentage numbers mean. All right, so that's a lot of numbers. When I talk about this stuff, people inevitably ask around at this point, all right, professor, that's great. So what's affordable? You showed us a lot of numbers. Are those rates affordable? We just looked at some prices for Cleveland. So are those numbers affordable? Is that 120 some, 130 some dollars? Is that an affordable number? And I'll tell you, I don't know. Affordability is a matter of community priorities. When confronting an affordability question, what we're really asking is a couple of complementary questions, which are, how much should households of limited means have to pay? What sacrifices can we reasonably expect people to make in order to pay for something that they need to live? Those are not scientific questions. Those are questions you can't answer with better data. Those are ethical questions. They're questions about values. And community values vary from place to place. What one community thinks is affordable may not be considered affordable elsewhere. And that brings us to the tricky question of thresholds. You will sometimes hear people say that the EPA has a standard of affordability. That's not true. The EPA has no standard of household affordability. It's just not true. If anyone tells you that they do, you can just shake your head in disappointment and, oh, no, you're just wrong, sorry. And you can send them to my blog and they can read all about it. But the point is that when we want to ask a question about affordability, that's inevitably going to lead us to this question about thresholds. What is the level at which we're going to say, no, that's unaffordable. We need to do something now to address our problem. Well, unfortunately, there's no easy answers to this. The Lord did not give me a stone tablet to share with y'all. I have no divine revelation. And as I said, there is no federal standard for this stuff. So the good news is, I should say the bad news is that there's no clear answer to the question. The good news is you get to decide. Well, I guess that's sort of bad news too, that communities need to decide for themselves what those affordability thresholds should be. But you know what? That's why we have a democratic process. That's why we have democratic governance, is to address difficult questions like these. And I promise you, I will get in touch right away. If I do get divine revelation and have a number for you, I will share it with the world, I promise. Okay, so we know what affordability, how to measure it. What do we do about it? Okay, once we decide what's affordable and what's not affordable, what do we do about it? Well, I want to be honest with you. We don't know a lot here. We have not got a great deal of research on approaches that work and don't work to addressing affordability. There is not a deep and voluminous body of research on this question. The scientific research is very thin. As a scholar, I tend to try to be cautious in declaring this is the answer in absence of evidence that, fairly strong evidence of what works and what doesn't. With those caveats aside, there are some things that we either do know works or we have strong reason to think will work. I'm going to talk about 6 things that can be elements of or part of the way we address affordability. I want to start by recognizing that just as there are no clear thresholds provided by the divine, there are no easy answers. Water and sewer affordability is a complicated problem, and it's going to require complicated, multifaceted solutions. You should always be, just generally speaking, we should always be suspicious of someone who says, oh, I've got an easy answer to a complicated problem. Sometimes those exist, but they usually don't. So what we want to think about is the different tools, the different mechanisms we have at our disposal to try to address affordability and how we can use them in combination with each other. So I'm going to talk about 6 things. You should think of them as complements. These go hand in hand. They are not alternatives. These are not mutually exclusive things, but I am going to talk about them in rough order of importance, from the most important things that we can do to the least important things that we can do. And all of what I'm going to talk about is pretty well grounded in what we know about water utilities and sewer utilities. The first one might seem a little counterintuitive, first thing that we should do, but it makes sense if you think about it for a few seconds. And that is to have a great water and sewer system. Folks in Cleveland know, probably better than most of the rest of the country, that there is more to affordability than a low bill. If the bill is low, but your river is on fire, then you haven't got affordable water. Right? Affordability has to start with environmental quality. It has to start with quality of tap water. There is a huge body of research, and including some of my own, that shows that people spend more money on bottled water when they don't trust their utilities. When they see poor environmental quality around them and they don't trust what's coming out of their tap, they spend money on commercial bottled water, or they go to buy those kiosks that you see out on the street or in the supermarket. The water that comes from bottles or from kiosks is orders of magnitude more expensive than what comes out of the tap. And guess what? Low-income households tend to distrust tap water the most, and they tend to spend the most money on bottled water, which costs 100 times as much as tap water on a per unit basis. So paradoxically, we might think of bottled water as this kind of luxury good that wealthy people buy. No. Empirically, it's just the opposite. Bottled water consumption is inversely related to income. The more money you make as a household, the more likely you are to drink tap water, the less likely you are to drink bottled water. So we might think of water and sewer systems, investing them as putting pressure on low-income households, but in the long run, the opposite is true. If your water bill goes up by $5 or $10, but you are no longer spending $40, $50, $60 a month on cases of Aquafina at Walmart, you're coming out ahead. So one thing is certain, cutting needed investments in ways that threaten water quality will only make the affordability problem worse. It always pains me when I hear utility leaders argue against new contaminant regulations with an affordability argument, because I think, you know what's really expensive? Cancer is really expensive. So let's not kid ourselves into thinking that keeping bills down by a few dollars is helping low-income households. Okay, so having said that, besides having a high water, I start with this one because let's never sacrifice environmental quality. Let's never sacrifice health in the name of affordability, because we're really still talking about we're talking about really good return on your investment when you invest in water systems. Okay. Second big thing to do in pursuit of affordability, of course, is to find ways to operate efficiently. We always want to deploy technology to do more with less. The Cleveland's utilities seem to be doing a lot of this stuff already. You want to hire and retain great employees who are going to produce efficiently and do good work. I don't want to belabor this point because technology is not really the point of the talk, but you do want to run do want to run your utilities efficiently. This is especially a problem for smaller systems, maybe not so much for a metro area like Cleveland, but for smaller systems, efficiency can be tough. I do want to spend a little more time talking about the third thing, which is progressive rate structures. Progressive pricing can really help affordability, because it's not just how much rate revenue we collect, but how we collect that revenue that matters for affordability. The way you price for affordability is you have low fixed charges. You want to keep those monthly fixed charges, the charges that you have to pay to get that very first gallon of water. You want to keep those as low as possible because it allows people to control how much they spend. And then you want to couple that with inclined block rates. By inclined block, what we mean is the more you pay, the more you consume, the more you pay. It's a little bit like a progressive tax structure. So what I'm talking about is something like a very low price for the first few units of water, maybe for the first 2,000 to 4,000 gallons. Maybe we only charge $2 per 1,000 gallons. And then as you start using more than that, when you start using 8 and 10 and 12 and 20,000 gallons, we start pricing it at higher prices, $4, $8, $10. This is a very common pricing structure in the desert Southwest. And they do it there largely for purposes of encouraging conservation, not necessarily for affordability, but it does have the effect of helping safeguard affordability as well. Some communities will build in a basic volume allowance to the fixed charge to try to sort of balance affordability with revenue stability. But one of the things that implies is utilities have to carry larger financial reserves, because a progressive rate structure does introduce some fluctuation. If it rains all summer and people don't irrigate the lawn, then you don't sell as much water, you don't make as much money. If it's dry all summer, you make a lot of money. But there could be some wild swings in utility revenue. You got to carry reserves to manage that. But the point is not, you don't want to manage that revenue risk on the backs of your low income customers. So rate structure is great. And one of the great things about rate structure for affordability is it touches everyone. You don't have to apply for anything. You don't have to prove to anyone that you need it. It's a price structure that touches every customer. Now, it's not going to solve the affordability problem for everyone because there are some low-income households that use a lot of water for a number of reasons, but it's going to help most. Number 4, intergovernmental funding. Been a lot of attention to this one lately. Congress, you might have noted, is hard at work on a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's getting fairly close to the finish line. I have to admit to you right up front, I'm not as familiar with what's happening in the Ohio State House. Maybe Crystal knows a little more than I do. But what's happening on Capitol Hill is a lot of discussions of infusions of capital for water and sewer systems. A couple of thoughts on that. Of course, free money from someone else is always good, right? It's always going to help with affordability, especially if you couple it with proper rate structures. Right? If you price progressively and you're getting a subsidy for your capital from Uncle Sam, that is going to help. But I want to say that this is not a good thing to do. Of course, we want federal and state help. However, I want to caution us against thinking that Congress or the State House is going to come charging in like the cavalry to save water and sewer systems. Even this bipartisan infrastructure bill is going to have, $55 billion for water and sewer, which is great, except when you start looking at the fine print, most of that's loans, which means that you still have to pay for things. It's just at low interest, and governments are already paying pretty low interest rates, so you're not really going to save all that much money. Plus, the congressional appetite for infrastructure funding can change every 2 years with every new election. So I'd counsel Cleveland area communities and communities elsewhere in the United States to look for state and federal funding, try to get it, but do not pin your hopes on significant and ongoing federal funding. Number 5, we might want to look at new revenue models. In the way back when, from the dawn of human civilization up to maybe about 100 years ago, water and sewer systems were built and paid for by tax revenue. And property and income taxes, of course, are more progressive than water rates. Water rates and sewer rates, some of the most regressive ways governments can raise money. But at least, with general tax revenue, those tend to be more progressive, more equitable across the income spectrum. About 100 years ago, we moved utilities mostly to a fee-for-service model. Now, that's not a bad thing. I want to emphasize that. It's a good thing that we moved to a utility model where we go on fee-for-service because it helps us operate and use our resources more efficiently. However, it does have this downside of creating affordability problems for some of the more vulnerable in our communities. So we need to think about maybe moving to something like a hybrid funding model where we use a combination of taxes and rate revenue to pay for these services. We might think about building subsidies in for the few thousand gallons, either providing them for free or for very, very low prices, subsidized by taxpayers. As an aside, much of the United States, it works the opposite way. Much of the United States utilities send a significant amount of money to the general fund, right? So they actually end up collecting taxes on behalf of the city, but it shows up on the water bill. As far as I know, that's not the case in Cleveland, but it is the case in much of the rest of the United States. Finally, there's assistance programs, income qualified assistance programs. Now, I put this one last on purpose. Once folks recognize that affordability is a problem, I think they tend to think immediately that the solution is some kind of assistance program. Find out who the low-income folks are who are struggling and build an assistance program to help them out. In fact, when you hear people say our affordability program, often what they really mean is their assistance program. When they talk about affordability, what they really mean is assistance. Now, as I think you've heard from me, affordability means a suite, a wide range of things that we do strategically to improve affordability. It's not just assistance. But I'll recognize assistance has some intuitive appeal, and for some folks can be important. The federal government has for 40 years now run LIHEAP, which is Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. And last year, Congress created a new low-income assistance program for water as part of the CARES Act, passed in December, signed into law by President Trump. They added to it again in the spring. However, I want to emphasize, we have decades of evidence now to suggest that income qualified assistance is only ever going to be a very limited way of helping low income households solve their water and sewer affordability problems. Now, I want to be very careful here. Assistance programs can be a very useful tool, but there are serious limits and we should be sober in our expectations about what we can expect assistance programs to do for water and sewer. I'm going to go really quickly through some of the reasons why. The first is assistance programs have very high administrative costs. Somebody has to keep track of which customers apply, qualify, and potentially or periodically requalify. We've got to have audit systems in place. Sometimes there's going to be fraud. We have to have systems to address those things. Civil challenges when people do or don't get their benefits on time. It is worth noting that 9 months after Congress passed that bill, we still have not, the federal government has still not sent a single dime to a single low-income customer. This was supposed to be a COVID disaster emergency relief fund. Nobody's received any money yet. Department of Health and Human Services has spent a lot of money with states setting up administrative processes. Now, this is not a shot at HHS or the state agencies. These programs are hard. They're really complex. And so we shouldn't be surprised that it takes a long time to get anything to work. Maybe more important than those administrative costs are what we call administrative burdens, which is the cost to the customer of participating. You got to learn that the program exists, find out if you're eligible, apply for the program. Periodically, you've got to reapply or risk losing your benefit. Each of those things takes time. A lot of folks, low-income folks and Americans generally do not trust the government. They don't necessarily want to tell you how much, I don't necessarily want to tell you how much money I make, how many people live in my home, what their employment status is, what my immigration status is. Maybe I've got some recreational drug use going on in my home. Maybe I've got relationships with people in my home that I don't want you to know about. Well, all those things create barriers to participation. And we know empirically from decades and decades of research on other income qualified programs that there is a large chunk of the population who will never apply for assistance, no matter how much they need it. Which brings us to a hard empirical reality we know about utility assistance, which is that participation is very low. In the handful of places where we've studied participation in water assistance, participation runs around 10 to 15%. My study of assistance programs, I looked at a bunch of them in the Seattle area. They found an average about 24% participation, which is on the high side. And LIHEAP is maybe the best example. Congress explicitly designed its new assistance program for water, designed it after LIHEAP. After 40 years, LIHEAP averages about 16% participation. That's 1/6. 16% of the eligible population participates in LIHEAP. So we're talking about the best program we've got out there, and it fails to help about 80% of the people who need it, even when they do really well. So that's just a hard empirical reality. And then finally, there's the problem of the poor subsidizing the poor. If you raise rates to fund an assistance program, what you've done is raised the price for everyone who doesn't participate. So if a majority of low-income households don't participate in the program, and you raise the rates in order to pay for an assistance program, you've just made the affordability problem worse for the majority of the low-income customers. Nobody wants that. Okay, now that's not to say we shouldn't have assistance programs. It's just to say that they're very limited and we need to be very careful about how we design and how we pay for them. I want to end on a very happy note about the end of my time. The good news is that the country has woken up to this problem. 10 years ago, I had to try to scream as loud as I could to get anyone to pay attention to this issue. Today, I don't have to scream. Other people are doing the screaming. We are a smart and resourceful people. When we identify a problem, it takes some work, but we can solve extraordinary problems. And again, the Cleveland audience knows this better than anyone. 50 years ago, that river you see on the screen, that was on fire. Today, it's a jewel. Cleveland is literally the textbook example of successful environmental regulation. Making water affordable in 2021 might be tough, but compared to water pollution in the 1960s, this one's a piece of cake. So I look forward to Cleveland being another textbook example in the years ahead as we address the affordability challenge. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Manny, for this informative discussion and presentation. Amazing, lots of information. I mean, I've been working in this for a little bit and I still have 3 pages of notes that I just took just because I want to make sure I hold on to those tidbits. So we have some questions that have populated in the chat. I have enough questions to take up another hour just myself. And then I had some DM questions as well. One of the first ones is from our colleague Divya. Can you share why low-income families trust tap water less?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons. And we you know, here's my chance to plug my forthcoming book. We've got a whole book about this. Hopefully, will be published next year. There are a lot of reasons. In some cases, low income, and especially, I didn't mention this yet, the distrust is especially high among people of color, Black, and especially Hispanic consumers tend to distrust tap water. Some of that is because their tap water is legitimately of poor quality. And that can have to do with bad utilities in some places, but in a lot of places, it can also have to do with poor premise plumbing, bad service lines, or old and failing plumbing in their homes. However, even stronger than those effects, we find a generalized distrust of institutions causes people to distrust their tap water. If you think about it, your tap water may be the most intimate relationship you have with a government. Right? We're talking about a life-sustaining liquid that comes into your home. You immerse yourself in it. You take it into your body. Right? That's an intimate relationship. And if you don't trust the government that's providing or regulating that service, you're not going to trust the service. So a lot of it we find relates directly to distrust of institutions generally and government specifically. And so we actually think that that's both bad news and good news. The bad news, this might be a revelation to some of you. There's not a lot of trust in government in the United States right now. And that's the bad news. The good news is we think that one of the ways that you can build trust, historically, one of the ways that governments have built trust in governance is through high quality water and sewer services. When we think about, go look as far back as something like ancient Rome. After conquering a new area, what did Romans do? Started building sewers, started building aqueducts, because it's a way to legitimize their conquests and their governance. The same was true 150 years ago. Politicians built the American political party by building infrastructure. They made people's lives better. They eradicated waterborne diseases, and that made people trust government. So why do people distrust tap water? Partly it's because in some cases it's legitimately bad, and partly because they distrust government. And the other thing that I think is really fascinating, your local tap water might be wonderful, but if a community that shares your basic demographic profile somewhere else has a failing water system, we find that people respond to that. So in that sense, everywhere is Flint, Michigan now. If you're poor and non-white, people look at that and go, yep, that's how government treats people like me. So that's why we see a lot of this distrust. Crystal, I think you're.
Yeah, sorry. Somebody has to do that on every call or it's not a real Zoom, okay?
Yeah.
Like that's part of the prerequisite of being on a Zoom. Somebody has to talk on mute. And so I just did that for everybody.
It's usually me.
So there are lots of reports that we reference when we talk about water affordability. There was a 2017 report that said that by the end of 2022, more than a third, 35.6% of the population would not be able to afford their water. There are many local health advocates in Cleveland, some on this call like Dana Langford with the Village of Healing in Cleveland, a Black health clinic, that are working at the intersection of public health, environmental justice, and water advocacy. Can you elaborate on how affordability has been impacted by the COVID crisis?
Okay, how affordability has been impacted by COVID? That's a very hard one. We're kind of, this is a thing that's happening in real time right in front of us right now, and the data are kind of all over the place. One of the reasons it's very hard to gauge, well, let me back up and start with a simple answer. The simple answer is it ain't helped. It's made matters worse. Anything that hurts the economy as badly as a pandemic is going to hurt affordability almost by definition. Having said that, how much did COVID hurt affordability is a hard question to answer, because in a lot of states, states imposed shut-off moratoria. And a lot of local governments, a lot of utilities did it. They self-imposed it, say, look, we're just not going to shut people off during a pandemic. That is a good thing to do. When we've got a public health crisis, last thing you want to do is deny people tap water. However, it does make it hard for us to understand just how bad the affordability problem has become, because now we've got bills running up, and we don't know if people aren't paying their bills because they can't afford them, or are they not paying their bills because there's no shutoff threats. These things are very difficult to disentangle. We are going to spend, this is my long rambly way of punting on the question of how bad it's going, how bad COVID was. We're going to have to wait till all the data are in. But as all these moratoria start expiring, we're going to get a much better sense of kind of the damage. Sort of like after the hurricane's blown through, then you look around and see how bad the damage was. That's so stay tuned. We'll find out.
Okay, great. Are there successful models in the country that we should be replicating here in Northeast Ohio? What do you think of Philadelphia's tiered assistance program or Seattle's discount program?
Okay, so beyond the 5 broad, or in conjunction with the 5 broad things that I mentioned earlier in my remarks, I want to be clear, nobody really knows at the granular level what works and what doesn't. The science is just way behind this stuff. Utilities are trying a lot of different things, to different aspects of these programs to get them to work. So all I can give you right now is impressions and anecdotes. We don't have a lot of rigorous data at this point on the details of program design. Having said that, a few principles that I think that we do know, some things that we do know. Anything that drives down the administrative burden of participating in an assistance program is going to help that assistance program. You saw the numbers. Participation in these programs is really low. And they're highly successful. I'll tell you, the one that the large city utility assistance program that got the highest participation I've ever seen was San Antonio. San Antonio water system pushed it all the way to 50%, and these folks emptied the playbook. They did everything that you could possibly imagine on outreach and registration, try to make things as easily as possible, and they got to 50%. It's the highest I've ever seen of a utility of any significant size. What do I think about Seattle's and Philadelphia's program? I've only looked at Seattle's a little bit. I think it's an encouraging program. They do a lot to try to keep administrative barriers low. They've developed some interesting analytical approaches to reach out proactively rather than waiting for people to sign up. They also work very hard at shutoff management. There's a lot of people who are eligible for shutoffs in Seattle, and hardly anyone gets shut off, because Seattle, from a management perspective, takes a high priority never to shut people off from their water. So it's exceedingly rare. So they do a lot of things to try proactively to get people enrolled, and they've got programs to help renters. It's a very creative and set suite of programs that I think are encouraging. I am less enthusiastic about Philadelphia's approach. In fact, I'll go and say on the contrary, I think Philadelphia's program, if it hasn't been a failure, it certainly hasn't been great. All right, 5 years into that program, they've got roughly 60,000 customers who are eligible. They have 15,000 enrolled, so that's 25% participation. They hired, to run this program, they hired 22 new full-time employees at an annual cost of $2.8 million. They spend another $400,000 a year on outreach, $400,000 in outreach, and they enroll roughly 5,000 new customers every year. And of course, some fall out of the program every year. So that's a very high cost for the level of participation that they get. But maybe from my perspective, the worst thing about the Philadelphia program is that they pay for that program with a 7-cent surcharge on all volumes of water sold. which means that for the 75% of customers who don't participate are now paying higher prices to help the 25% of customers who do. So low-income customers who don't participate in the program now spend something like $7 to $10 a year more than they did before that program was created. 7 to 10 bucks a year, not a lot, but when you're poor, it is a lot. So I think that program's gotten a lot of attention, it's generated a lot of buzz, but it's an administratively extremely expensive program, and it just hasn't reached very many people for the kind of money that they're spending.
Okay, and I know we're winding down on time. Another quick question. Have you seen any successful community-led funds that bridge the gap between assistance programs and helping residents afford their water bills?
You know, I haven't. I know these programs are all over the place. It's one of the challenges we have with this area of policy is there's been so little systematic research. A lot of us know about this case here, that case here, and a handful of other cases elsewhere. But what we don't have is any kind of comprehensive analysis of thousands of examples to see what models are out there. Certainly there are community groups that help either through administration of these programs or through subsidy of the programs or creating direct bill assistance themselves. I can't really comment on how well or how poorly any of them work because there just hasn't been any rigorous analysis of them.
Thank you. Thank you again for your time and expertise. We have at least a couple dozen more questions we could easily go through, but we're at the end of our time. So I'll pass it back to Erin.
Thank you so much. My apologies for running through this like this. See, Crystal, you're not the only one that can do funny Zoom things. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here today on behalf of our Affordability Committee and the partners. We hope that you enjoyed today's seminar and that you'll stay connected and involved. I'd like to leave you with a few resources and opportunities for action to improve water equity. As a resident, you can use the Cleveland Environmental Resident Engagement Toolkit to learn more about priority issues and ways to advocate for policy changes that create a more equitable and just environmental future for Cleveland. The toolkit is available for download in English, Arabic, Chinese, and Spanish. And you can also let your community groups and neighbors know about assistance programs. A new crisis assistance program will be available in the fall, and existing programs will have expanded eligibility starting in 2022. So please be on the lookout for information regarding that and share it with your networks. And that will include, those new programs and expansions will include an additional 20,000 people that will qualify for the new programs. You can learn more about all of these programs and organizations through what you see on the screen. Please go to the Sewer District's website, Cleveland Water, CHN Housing Partners, and step forward. They have tons of great information about all of the programs available in our community. Thanks again for joining today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.